Welcome for another year of the War Room Draft Show. I'm here with Andrew Little. I'm psyched to be back, Andrew. I mean, we were talking about it in the back office, and it's draft season again. That time of year's in the air. We're going to be going through this entire secondary class, basically, or a large majority of it, doing superlatives of the best at each sort of category within the key points of these secondary prospects. And then we're going to be ranking some of our top guys at both the cornerback position and the safety position within this episode. Man, I'm stoked, Andrew, and I'm so glad you're here to talk draft with me.
Oh yeah, man. Thanks so much for having me on. Love draft season. And man, this DB group is really fun. The cornerback class especially is really good. One of the deepest classes in a long time. And then the safety group, a little less certain. So it's an interesting one as well. Excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I think this cornerback class has multiple first round guys, like easily. And then the safety class is one that's going to be fun to talk about because our rankings are definitely going to vary. I don't know what Andrew has on his rankings. He doesn't know mine, but all I know is that they're going to vary because there's so much variability in this class at that position, especially. But before we get into any of that, make sure you guys go subscribe to our Patreon page. We are making people a ton of money over there. It's a winning investment for everybody involved. So get in on the action. Win yourself some money, invest a little bit to make even more. Join an interactive betting community. Again, the link is in the description. But Andrew, starting things off with superlatives, you see it right down below. I left it up so that way the people throughout the introduction were ready for what our first superlative was going to be. And that is the best in man coverage. We are combining here the cornerbacks and the safeties because some of these guys are a bit interchangeable. Some guys that are listed as safeties, we're sitting there saying, hey, you know what? They're damn good at man coverage. Maybe they're a cornerback in the NFL or vice versa. And I think for the most part, it is vice versa, seeing these cornerbacks switch over to safety. But regardless, Andrew, who is your best man coverage defensive back in this class?
Yeah, we were talking about it a little bit backstage how all the corners at the top of the draft are really good in man coverage. And I think there's a pretty obvious guy at the top, and it's Devin Witherspoon from Illinois. His this year senior, he was just locked down in man coverage. But there's another guy I kind of want to talk about. I'm going to go with him. It's Deonte Banks. We saw him blow up the combine, had maybe the best RAS score of the entire class, and he's just a super tradesy corner, and he's underrated in coverage as well. I think he's got a lot more polish than people are giving him credit for. He's played against a lot of really good receivers. Saw him go against those Ohio State guys, and he's sticky. He's really, really fast. He's 4.3 40 time. Has all the traits to do it, and I don't love him in zone coverage, but that's why I like him with some of these man coverage teams. Right. I think his ceiling right now might be the Patriots in the middle of round one. I know you're a Pats fan, so I think that could be a fun fit. I think Deonte Banks he's really a riser, and I think his man coverage is a big part of it.
Yeah. The first guy you mentioned, Devon Witherspoon, he was my choice for this. We're going to get into Witherspoon's entire game, but just specifically in man coverage, I mean, just what he put on tape in college was just a shutdown guy. Like his tape is insane, and a lot of that came out of man coverage. Not that he can't play zone, but primarily in man, this dude is insane. Whether that was or is out of the slot, I think I project him to be a really good slot guy. But on the outside is really where he played for the Fighting Illini, and he was fantastic. Amazing athlete. He can match up with anybody step for step, pound for pound. And we'll get into the ball skills soon, but that's just another area tied to man coverage, specifically on the boundary, that it's tough not to love Devon Witherspoon. And again, just from the footwork, the technique. Some people say he gets a little grabby, but I feel like that's the case with most of these man heavy corners coming out of college. So that's like one thing that just bothers me. One of the top guys in this class, Joey Porter, maybe is one that you could be like, yeah, he is a little too grabby, but then you get to a guy like Witherspoon. Occasionally, yes, but for the most part, really not a big concern for me.
Yeah, Witherspoon, really physical. I don't really want to call him grabby. I think he's a physical corner, and sometimes you're going to have plays like that, and that's okay. That's just the kind of game he plays.
Yeah, I can't. That's one thing, just getting gripes right out of the way, Andrew, is when people are like, yeah, I pointed out 2 or 3 times that this man coverage heavy corner got a little handsy at the top of a stem. And it's like, dude, that's going to happen. This dude is 20, 21 years old, young cornerback prospect, played a ton of man coverage. If he only grabbed 2 to 3 times, 4 or 5 times, whatever it may be, that's a win in my book. So that's one gripe I have. I think Witherspoon's fantastic in man. But switching over to press coverage now. Again, kind of varies with man coverage for the most part, but it's a specific build. These are the guys that have a lot of length. Maybe they pack a bit of a punch at the line. They've got good footwork. They're not really getting burned by some of these speedier, shiftier guys. I think my choice was pretty obvious here, Andrew, but I want to hear who you got.
Yeah, and my choice was I didn't even think about this one. It's Joey Porter with those 34-inch arms. He is just unbelievable off the line. I mean, we just talked about him a little bit. Pretty grabby, that's true, but I think he's gotten a lot better. I was not a fan of him with last year. I had like a 7th round grade on him when we thought he was coming out. Came back, turned out to be a great decision because now I don't want to spoil my rankings, but I'm a big fan of Joey Porter Jr. He's cleaned up his coverage so much, and I think I've come around a little bit more to these grabby corners. Like you said, it's a part of just the physical nature of college football. But yeah, he uses his length so well. This is not a comp, but it kind of reminds me of Sauce Gardner last year, the way he uses his length to deflect balls. I mean, nobody can go toe-to-toe with him in college football when it comes to press man coverage. So I think that's going to translate right away to the NFL. Those 34-inch arms it's unbelievable.
Yeah, and he's got 34-inch arms. He legitimately packs a punch. And Andrew, I won't lie, the 7th round grade stunned me a little bit when you said that, but
that was more like his October, September tape from last year. Right. But yeah, that's how much he's grown. That's kind of what I was going for. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's where I want to touch upon. Again, it sounds crazy because this is a 7th round corner. Now he's a 1st round guy, but no, the tape is significantly better in 2022. Like this dude skyrocketed up rankings. Even as crazy as that might sound, but like Andrew, you make a point. Like he really did. His stock went up so much, and that's going to be his calling card. The press man stuff. You look at all these teams. I think in the middle of the 1st round is that prime sweet spot for Joey Porter to go. We'll get more into a specific landing spot soon, but yeah, those press man teams are going to be all over Porter. From the wingspan, the physicality, the pack of a punch, and the fact that he really just doesn't beat off the line all that often. He's the best press man corner in this draft. I completely agree with that. But now we get into zone coverage, which to me, out of the 3 coverage superlatives, was the toughest one.
For sure.
A lot of these top guys are man-heavy guys, primarily man coverage corners, and I think this class, for all the depth it has, a bit more shallow on zone guys. There are guys that do it really well, but none of them are really at the top of this class, which is what gave you a lot of options and a lot of different ways to go about this. Andrew, where are you going with zone coverage?
Yeah, and like you said, I struggled really hard with it, or a lot with this one. I was trying to think of a guy at the top of the draft that was the best in zone, and I couldn't really come up with him. So I ended up going with Clark Phillips. From Utah. He's a smaller guy, and I love him in man coverage too. I think he's a really feisty corner, has some of the best tape in the class, but he's really, really small. He's not an elite athlete, so he's not going to be able to hold up in man coverage at the next level. But his zone coverage, I think that's where he could succeed. We've seen guys like DJ Reed and Darius Williams, who are these shorter, like 5'9" corners, succeed in zone defenses in the NFL. I think that could be Clark Phillips in his. He matches up with guys really well, really smart player, and he's a ball hawk too. So I like what he has in zone. It helps make up for his size deficiencies.
Yes, Clark Phillips was one of the guys I was considering here. There's a lot of names to get into. I think that you could potentially go about this. I'm going to mention one cornerback and possibly 2 safeties, but I'll try to stick to one. That's just how many options there were for this one. My cornerback that I want to mention outside of Clark Phillips would be Garrett Williams out of Syracuse.
Love Garrett Williams.
Ton of off-man reps. That was like his thing at Syracuse. He has a ton of experience there. Really heads-up football player. Like really, really heads up. Love the instincts. Great job just passing off routes. I thought the timing was just beautiful. Any zone coverage team is going to look at Garrett Williams and be like, yes. And then on top of that, I don't want to factor it in too much, but it's kind of like the ball skills with man coverage on the boundary. The run support and zone coverage plays a little bit of a factor into these top tier zone coverage guys, because having that ability to run support is really a key factor, because typically these zone coverage heavy teams rely a little bit more on their corners to get involved in the run game. And Garrett Williams can click and close with the best of them, really downhill, and he wraps up pretty well. I'm not saying he's the best run stopping corner in this class, but he's damn good at it. And then at safety, Brian Branch.
I have a feeling he's going to be the winner for several of these.
He's going to be the winner for a lot of these, Andrew. Absolutely. And obviously it's kind of tough for him to be in the running for the first 2 as a safety, but in zone coverage, I don't love him on the back end as much. I'm not really going to put him as a single high for all the versatility he has, but he is sufficient on the back end if you're running a cover 2, cover 3, cover 4, whatever it may be. But especially in those intermediate routes or, in those shallower routes, kind of passing off things in the middle of the field or on the boundary, again, in the intermediate to shorter area of the field, he's near flawless. Near flawless. The instincts are top notch. Communication is top notch. He reads and reacts just beautifully. The whole 9 yards are there with Brian Branch in zone coverage. And I wanted to mention Sidney Brown as well from Illinois. He's got a twin brother, Chase Brown, running back. I was tweeting a lot about him the other day. I might actually be a bit lower on Brown considering all the hype he's gotten recently, but in coverage, there's a lot of intrigue there. This is a bit of a projection though, because he was primarily a box safety at Illinois. But with the range that he has, with the ability to fly all over the field, with all of his athleticism, and the glimpses we did see of him as a single high safety or in those 2 high shells were fantastic. So in terms of being a zone coverage corner on the back end, Sidney Brown. I almost called him Chase Brown, but Sidney Brown. No, he's just, I project him to be very good there. He has all the tools to be very good in that department.
Absolutely. And he really impressed at the Senior Bowl as well in coverage. I actually saw a lot more man coverage from the Senior Bowl, but the zone definitely translated on tape. And then Garrett Williams, he's one of my guys for the Bengals at the end of the second round. If he's there, I'd love to take him. So yeah, 2 great shouts right there.
You might be able to, I was just going to say, the Bengals might be able to wait a little longer to get Garrett Williams. We'll get more into that because he's one of my, when we rank the cornerbacks, he'll be mentioned somewhere in the realm, whether that's as a sleeper or he sneaks on the list. You'll have to wait and find out for that one, but I do want to talk a bit more about him. But now we get into best tackler. And this is, again, with the zone coverage and the tackler, this is really where we're starting to mix the safeties and the cornerbacks into one whole bunch. It really widens up the player pool, if you will. But with that being said, I think we are both on the same page here. This is one that I feel like with conviction, we are probably both on the same page here.
I would think so. To me, there was a correct answer. Brian Branch. The dude does not miss tackles on tape. He just doesn't. It's impressive. He comes from a Nick Saban Alabama defense, and he's coached up really, really good technique, sound tackler, just always in the right spot. And him playing so much in the slot allowed him to make a lot of big time tackles, both in the backfield and across the middle of the field. So I think he had like a 3% missed tackle rate over the past year. It's just something ridiculous.
And again, Andrew, you said it. Playing in the slot. He's in the box all the time. This isn't a free safety that comes down when he wants to, and he missed tackles here and there on a small sample size. Branch is always involved in the run game, pretty much on a consistent basis. He is one of the best tackling defensive backs we have seen over the past 5 years, like pretty easily. He's fantastic. He's my choice for this as well. The next 2 are really interesting, though. It's not as easy as the best tackler portion. We got best ball skills and then coming up most versatile defensive back of the bunch. But starting off again with best ball skills in this class, I'm debating between 2 guys here. And Andrew, you told me in the back office you were debating between 2 guys with this as well. So I want to see if we're on the same page.
Yeah, and I'll just say I ended up just making my decision about a minute ago. I've been going back and forth. It was Christian Gonzalez for me. Wanted to talk about him a little bit. Was trying to find a spot. I think this is the one. He's former receiver, really athletic track guy. Moved from Colorado, had a lot of ball production too. And then at Oregon, I just thought he was really, really sticky in coverage. Love what I saw here. And let's see, who was your guy, Aidan?
Well, my 2 guys, actually, I like Gonzalez a lot. I thought his ball skills came around a lot at Oregon this year. The thing that held me back from putting Gonzalez in there was the lack of ball production in his, years prior at Colorado. With that being said, it is like, man, the ball skills were very, very good this year. But 2 guys I would still put ahead of him. Not because Gonzalez had bad ball skills. Again, they really came along this past year. But Emmanuel Forbes and another.
That was the guy I was down with. Or down to.
Yeah. And look, Forbes, the reason I debate between these 2, I think Witherspoon's ball skills are better in man coverage because Forbes just isn't a big man coverage guy. And Witherspoon has the great ball skills without having as many lapses as Forbes does. But man, Emmanuel Forbes gets his hands on more footballs than really anybody in this class. And that kind of includes Devon Witherspoon. And if I want one guy in off-man coverage to just be a ball hawking corner, it's Emmanuel Forbes. This dude jumped so many routes last year. His ability to just sit in off-man zone, read the eyes of the quarterback, and make plays is extremely impressive. It's extremely impressive. It comes with lapses. The popular comparison, I don't compare them as players. Their frame is different. There's things that are different about them, but the classic example of these ball hucking guys where you live with the risk and the reward is Trayvon Diggs, where he's jumping a ton of routes, creating a ton of turnovers, but you're also going to live with him getting beat on double moves, getting, biting on pump fakes and getting beat downfield. That is Emmanuel Forbes. You're going to put him in that off-man zone, let him jump routes, but also be prepared for the negatives as well, because he's going to get toasted getting way too aggressive jumping on some of those routes. But his ball skills are really, really good, and he absolutely deserves a shout for the superlative.
Yeah, it's a special trait. It really is. Most pick sixes, I believe, in NCAA history, like the way he jumps routes is just ridiculous. Whereas Gonzalez, I think this year, especially more, his ball production comes from his athleticism. Emmanuel Forbes is so calculated in jumping those routes, and that's why he takes it to the house so much. He's a risk taker, no doubt about it. And with that frame, might be a concern at the next level. That's why I lean Gonzalez. I think his ball skills will translate a little bit more. But yeah, Emmanuel Forbes, unreal guy.
Yeah, for sure. No, and it's pick your flavor, right? Do you want the man coverage ball skills guy, or do you want the zone coverage ball skills guy who might gamble a bit more? It's scheme dependent, really. I mean, in terms of being an overall prospect, I think we all know who do we want out of those two, Gonzalez and Witherspoon versus Emmanuel Forbes. But you get my point. Moving on now to most versatile. This is the last superlative before we get into our player rankings. This was another one that I was going between three guys with. Maybe could make a case for a fourth. This includes safeties as well. This was cornerbacks and safeties, just a mix, a bunch. This was maybe the toughest one for me to decide. Andrew, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, and so this is a really versatile safety class, especially. I don't know about it. For the cornerbacks, I wasn't seeing as much versatility just because I think a lot of the guys at the top are. I'm not so sure about how they will transfer between schemes. But safety wise, a lot of guys kind of in that Bengals fan, Daxton Hill mold from a couple years ago, from last year. And the guy I ended up going with, he's not a top prospect, might not even be a day 2 pick, but Jartavius Martin from Illinois. He blew up the combine, 44-inch vertical, I believe was the best in the entire class, not just DBs, 4.4 40 time. And he played all over the secondary for Illinois, playing with Sidney Brown, playing with Devin Witherspoon, and that definitely helps. Really good in the slot, and I think his athleticism came to shine most there, but also pretty good back. I think single high, he was decent. He's got the range for it, and even some outside cornerback. Didn't play it very often, but there were a couple of reps where he was doing it. I think he could do that maybe a little bit in the NFL. So Jartavius Martin, just a really athletic guy that I think can play anywhere in the secondary. Jordan Reed was just talking on the Bootleg Football podcast about how he's one of his guys, and I like him for the exact same reason. Just a lot of versatility for a guy that you can get at kind of a discount.
So more names have entered my head now. I'm gonna guide. This is one that I'm just gonna go with a laundry list of guys. Maybe I'll pick one at the end. Cornerback. I know it sounds boring. Devon Witherspoon and Christian Gonzalez. I think Witherspoon was, again, on tape, he impressed me the most out of this entire class with his tape this past season as an outside corner. But in the NFL, he could be a great outside corner and an even better slot guy. Put him in the slot where he can put an extra emphasis on run support and getting after the quarterback, 2 areas where he is fantastic as well because he hits like a mother, It's insane. To me, Witherspoon I can't really poke that many holes in his game besides his frame, really, but everything he puts on tape is good. Checks off every single box in pretty much every role you put him in. And again, I know we want to see him more in the slot, but I have no reason to believe he wouldn't be absolutely stellar in that role. And then Christian Gonzalez, just for the simple fact that this dude not only is just a great, we shouted him out for the ball skills and the man coverage stuff, Andrew, but even in run support, he's awesome. And to find a guy that has put it all together at that frame with that athleticism, Gonzalez is a legit pretty much a perfect frame for a cornerback, and he moves like some of these smaller cornerbacks in the draft. Like you hear it every year with these smaller corners, right? Well, they're really fluid and they're fast and they can fire downhill, but they lack the size to go hand in hand. No, Gonzalez combines it both. He's got the size and all those athletic traits. So I think Gonzalez could potentially play multiple roles at the cornerback position. Again, this is one that I want to separate the positions a little bit just because safety and corner are different. And it's a bit of transparency with this one. Brian Branch, I know it's boring, but the dude literally does everything on the football field. I'll kind of save that for later because I want to dive into his whole game when we get to our safety rankings. But, you also look at like Jamie Robinson, for example, played pretty much every single role in that Florida State defense. I think Antonio Johnson has some impressive. These are all the top guys. I get it. But I think they all deserve recognition. And my main point with all this is there's a reason all these top guys are where they are in this class for the most part. It's because they have insane versatility. They've thrived in so many different roles. They're not necessarily scheme dependent. Just shining an extra emphasis and an extra light on the most versatile guys in this class. But ultimately, I'm going to go with Devon Witherspoon for this one. I know it's boring, but the dude could legitimately be an all-pro outside corner and slot corner. That is insane. That's absolutely nutty.
Yeah, I like it. He definitely, the traits would translate to the slot. And if there's a team that has concerns about his frame, put him in the slot right away. Maybe he's dominant. He definitely could be. And like you said, I love his run defense going downhill, and he'd definitely benefit. Kind of Mike Hilton-y maybe. If you get him blitzing a little bit, that'd be really fun with Devon Witherspoon.
Oh, yeah. No, completely. And the blitzing, we'll get more into it. I'm getting excited about Devon Witherspoon. We'll get more into it. But no, he's insanely versatile. And one more guy, Jordan Battle out of Alabama. The reason I couldn't pick him for this is just because I don't know if he's elite in all that many areas, but he does everything pretty well. So another shout worth mentioning. I wanted to say when we get more specific and dive into their whole game, but man, a lot of versatile guys at the top of this class, which again, it correlates. It goes hand in hand with today's NFL. Sure. But quarterback rankings, Andrew. We're going to go over our top 5 at each position. So starting with cornerback, then we'll head over to safety. When we finish, I'm sure we'll go over some honorable mentions or maybe even a sleeper that's outside your top 8, top 9, top 10, but you really want to shout them out. You think they could be a steal late in the draft. We're really going to dive into it and go 10 toes down on just their whole prospect profile and see how our rankings vary here, Andrew. So number 5, kick us off.
Yeah, number 5. I had 2 guys that I've been going back and forth on. It's been difficult for me, and I ultimately went with the player that I'm more comfortable with his transition to the NFL, and that's Cam Smith, the corner out of South Carolina. It's a little helmet scouting here, but when you watch him, I saw some similarities to J.C. Horn. Just good rep to rep, really athletic player. Great in man coverage. He can run with anybody, and just great ball production. PFF had him graded out really, really well. Saw it last year, and then continued that again this year. I wish he would have taken another step. I think he got passed up by some of the guys we're going to talk about a little bit later. But Cam Smith, one of these guys where I think you put him out on an island, he's going to have success going one-on-one with players.
Yeah, Cam Smith has talked about wanting to be J.C. Horn. Like, he loves J.C. Horn. He wants to play with that same energy, and he really does. Like, his motor is awesome. And he's a football player. Like, it's easy to see. And I don't blame him. J.C. Horn's fantastic. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Cam Smith was like arguably this cornerback number 1 for a lot of people coming into the year, even pretty early in the year. And then he did get passed up. I will say his combine was nice because the athleticism started to get questioned a little bit. And he had an amazing RAS score, and he really showed out at the combine. But my number 5 is Emmanuel Forbes. We talked about him with the ball skills. I mean, Andrew, we know there are so many different ways you could go with this spot. Forbes is right in my notes right here. Slim build and over aggressive are going to be the 2 biggest knocks that you hear on Emmanuel Forbes. I understand it. It's probably why you could make an argument for me maybe putting him too high. I would say the 5th ranking right here is probably as high as I could put Forbes, and it's risky. But when I look at where the NFL is trending nowadays, like the Trayvon Diggs thing, again, I don't compare Forbes to Trayvon Diggs at all, but there are some similarities in ultimately like what you like to see out of these guys. It's the ball skills. It's all the turnovers they can produce out of that off-man position. In today's NFL, these teams are running so much off-man, so much zone coverage, and at the end of the day, defenses are a little less about shutting teams down and a little bit more about let's turn the ball over. Let's get a little momentum and give our offense the ball back because it's an offensive driven league. So when you look at guys like Forbes who can get their hands on the football and create multiple turnovers, they are assets. And I know Trayvon Diggs gets a lot of hate for his play style and the amount of times he gets burnt. But with the way the NFL is trending nowadays towards an offensive centric league where you're not, if you really get to the playoffs and you get to the best of the best, it's an offensive shootout 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10. The emphasis now shifts a little bit away from shutting these guys down and more so to creating turnovers. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, too, Andrew, it's tough for one corner to truly shut down a whole offense anyway. So I think Forbes kind of got the bump into my 5 spot because I think he fits perfectly with where the NFL is trending.
Yeah, and we talked about it earlier. That ball production is insane. He's got some special traits, but for me, I'm gonna play a little bit of a devil's advocate here. He's one of these guys that has very obvious flaws, and I think that's gonna hurt him a little bit. But he also has some obvious strengths we talked about. The frame really does scare me. If he was a bigger corner and he jumped those routes, like not even bigger, just like average size corner, I think I'd be okay with him. But then you add in the 166 pounds, and then he jumps routes a lot. I think he's gonna have some growing pains for sure. If he starts next year. And so for having those 2 flaws, which I think are 2 of the biggest things I worry about with young corners, I can't put him in my top 5, but I do like the player. But top 5 is a little rich for me just with how good this class is.
And that's completely fair. I could see Emmanuel Forbes at the back end of your of a top 10. He might be like low-key a red shirt in the first year. Andrew, I mean, you bring those things up. It's the back and forth. I will say he's lengthy. I think that was one thing that pushed him up into my top 5 as well. It's like, man, he's small. He's always going to be small. But the wingspan, I think that could make up for some of it. And that really further accentuates his ability with the ball skills and making plays with the ball. This is a risky ranking for sure. If I had to choose, if I'm at the top of the second round, I need a corner and Emmanuel Forbes. My top 4 guys are gone and Emmanuel Forbes is sitting there. Even if I run a lot off man, I still might be like, I'd rather just trade down, recoup some more value and just take a corner later. Let the board kind of make the decision for me. I don't say that very often, but that's just how tight this 5th spot was and how truly boom bust Emmanuel Forbes is. But why don't you get to your number 4, Andrew?
Yeah, number 4, I talked about him a little bit earlier. It's Deonte Banks, and I was starting to come around to him before the combine. He was one of these guys that some of the main scouts like Daniel Jeremiah, Dane Brugler were talking about is like, oh, this guy could be a first-round pick. And then all of that combine. Oh, my goodness. That was unbelievable performance from Deonte Banks. And the thing that I like is the athleticism shows on tape. That's something I kind of watch for in the combine. Is this a dude? It's confirmation bias, really. Is this a guy that we saw that was really athletic, or is this somebody that comes out of nowhere? And Deonte Banks uses his athleticism really well. I love the man coverage, definitely. He can run with anybody with that 4.3 speed. He's big enough where he can take any guy on one-on-one. And then the zone instincts were I thought they improved throughout the year. He's one of these guys that I thought got better with each game I watched. So I liked him a lot, a lot more than I expected to. I think it's somebody the NFL is going to be really high
on. I look at Banks here. I've scrolled through a ton of these mock drafts. I've kind of been looking at some of the projections for some of these top guys. Banks is pretty much he's pretty much a first round guy everywhere. And what I basically wrote for a note was, I can't take him in the first round. I can't view him as that type of guy. So this is me playing a little bit of devil's advocate for you, Andrew. And I'm not even saying you even viewed him as a surefire first round guy. You were just saying he's viewed as a first round guy at this point. I do think he will go there because teams love the toolsy guys that can give you some man coverage chops, even though it's a very zone heavy league. Those guys who can just shut down and man. Banks has that type of upside because he has the frame, the athletic tools that you talked about, Andrew. Truly has one of the highest ceilings in this draft, and I could be dead wrong. If he gets into that right cornerback room with the right coaching and they put an emphasis on man coverage, I hear you. I hear you 1,000%. My issue with Banks, though, was like, okay, the ball skills are, I don't want to be harsh and say terrible, but they're bad. I will say that they're bad. He's going to play on the boundary all the time. I think in press coverage, he has a lot of upside again because he has the athletic tools and the length and the frame. He could be a physical corner that bumps and runs a ton of these guys, but he did get beat a few too many times in press, got beat a few too many times down the sideline, and I saw too much panic in his game, specifically when he got beat down the boundary and he couldn't have eyes on the quarterback. But that's an issue too, because if you're going to be a man coverage guy, if teams are viewing Banks as his first round prospect because of the extra juice he can give you in man coverage with all his athleticism and his length, the panic that he shows when he can't put his eyes on the quarterback really, really concerns me. I think it's going to lead to a lot of flags and a severe lack of ball skills, a lot of lack of ball production. And for that reason, I had to leave Banks out of my top 5. First round, I think that's the one corner that I'm going to be like, could be awesome, but I'm not going to be the one taking that chance. Even if, again, I'm a man-heavy team, I'm probably looking elsewhere.
Yeah, and I can respect that. The zone coverage, it does. It's like if you're a team that runs predominantly zone coverage, I'd agree with you. I don't know if I'd take him in the first round, but if you're a team that runs a lot of man coverage, maybe has the cornerback room to develop him and not necessarily rely on him right away, there's not really a ceiling for where I'd take him. I think his traits are that good, and he's a guy that got better throughout each game. So I liked the toughness he showed. But yeah, definitely needs to work on the technique. But the upside for me, which, at cornerback, it's such a traits-driven position. That's why I'm pretty high on Deonte Banks.
It is. And you're right about that. That's why, if Banks is there in the second round, again, especially if you're a man-heavy team and you trust your coaching staff, which all of these teams do, but that's awesome for Banks. But he's going to go in the first round. I probably won't be a huge fan of it, but you're right. The traits are there. And ultimately, when you're at the top of the draft, that's what you're drafting for, is the traits. At number 4, I have Cam Smith. People won't like me for this because actually it's funny. I put out a tweet about Banks yesterday and kind of his lack of ball skills. And the first comment I got was, still better than Cam Smith. I'm like, all right, I don't know when Cam Smith entered this conversation. Personally, I disagree. But some people would say, well, Banks has the higher ceiling. We're going to take a shot on his traits. He definitely does. Smith, again, we talked about the motor earlier and how he kind of wants to take on that JC Horn aura when he was playing for the Gamecocks in South Carolina. He's got awesome ball skills. He lined up inside and outside, had well over a triple-digit snap counts at each one of those alignments, both on the outside and out of the slot this past season. And his combine was really impressive because a lot of people were sitting there like, does he get beat vertical a few too many times? Why didn't South Carolina put him closer to the line of scrimmage more often? Is this guy really a great athlete? He lit up the combine. Now, I still do question it, Andrew. Is he more of a combine athlete than a true football athlete? I think it's worth mentioning because, again, he did get beat a few too many times, whether that was him, a bit slow with his hips or just getting beat vertical. Why didn't he play more press man coverage? But ultimately, I think Cam Smith is just a very good football player that loves football. He's got the ball skills. I like him in off man. And I think if this athleticism takes a leap and maybe translates to the football field in a different scheme, maybe there is more around the line of scrimmage than I think. So I don't know if I'd take Cam Smith in the first round. I think there's only 3 guys that I feel truly convicted with that about. But despite all the recent fall he's had in draft stock, I still do find myself liking Cam Smith.
Yeah, and the combine, I don't know that I saw the 4.43 speed on tape, but he does have definitely NFL athleticism. And yeah, first round, I don't know if I'd go there, but there is one team in the late first that I actually would like to pick. It's the Cowboys, and I think it's because Trayvon Diggs is there. Cam Smith has that attitude that you love from a cornerback where he's a confident guy. I think he's definitely learned from JC Horn in that area. And so I think him and Trayvon Diggs would be a really fun secondary.
Oh, it would. And just looking at the Cowboys real quick, by the way, we'll talk all about team strategy and things like that as we near closer to the draft. But today is just, let's dive into the secondary guys. That secondary, I mean, I'm looking at it. They've got their slot position pretty much figured out. They got Trayvon Diggs as their cornerback number 1. And then this year, Gilmore will be their number 2. But Gilmore's a short-term rental that they got on the team. Yeah. You're still looking for that corner that is going to be able to replace Gilmore, because I don't think Gilmore's a long-term guy. He's getting older. I don't know if Dallas will be able to pay him. So it's not a bad idea for Dallas with the fact that they have a really well-rounded roster as it is, get one of these corners that you love, an extremely deep cornerback class, give them a year to learn from Gilmore, learn from Diggs, slowly ease them into things, and then next year they could explode onto the scene. Just looking at Dallas real quick, I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and Stephon Gilmore, that'd be another great mentor for him. Another South Carolina guy too. So
yeah, right, exactly.
Would be a really great fit. And you can never have too many DBs. So I'm kind of talking myself more into that, thinking, hey, that'd be a good team fit for him. But now maybe it does make some sense for the Cowboys as well.
Yeah. Again, I don't know if I'd be enthralled with Cam Smith as a first-round guy, but late in the first, Cowboys have a need there. I don't hate it. Don't love it, but I don't hate it either. I don't. I like Cam Smith. But then we get to the top three. I think everybody's top three is pretty consensus at this point. Pretty consensus. A couple different lists here and there that I've seen, because I like to scour the internet and see what people are up to and what they think about these positions. But regardless, Andrew, I think this is one that we're going to agree on, but you never know. I've seen this guy that I have at number 3 specifically as high as number 1 on some people's rankings. So, Andrew, go for it.
Yeah, I think that might be the scenario we're in right here. My number 3 guy is Christian Gonzalez, which might come as a shocker to some people. And look, if he's I'm fully expecting him to be a top 2 corner off the board, and I have no issue if he's a top corner off the board. I see it.
He might be the top.
He's got the traits for sure. Great ball production with those 4 interceptions at Oregon. Great in man coverage because of that athleticism. You talked about it, very fluid. But he's got size. So he's not one of these small corners that you're worried about how he's going to hold up in the next level. And then zone coverage of these top guys, I thought he had some of the better zone skills that might translate, not his calling card necessarily. So Christian Gonzalez is one of these guys that I feel pretty confident that the NFL is going to love him and that he's going to start right away just because of those traits. But it's not necessarily what he doesn't have that puts him at 3. It's what the other 2 guys have that I love. And so physically, he's the best corner in this class, even ahead of Deonte Banks. But the other 2 guys just have 1 or 2 elite things about them that I'm really intrigued by.
So my number 3, I was going to say that, by the way, Andrew. I was like, I feel like what you're basically telling me is it's not that I don't like Gonzalez, because I know number 3 is a bit lower than consensus ranking on him. It's just I love the other 2. That's my reasoning basically for putting Joey Porter at 3. I view him as a first-round guy. Again, I talked about those sweet spot teams for him. Patriots at 14. Everybody talks about the Steelers at 17. I've kind of been harping on that for a while now. A lot of those teams right in his range where Witherspoon and Gonzalez are probably going to be the top 2 guys to go in this class, and they are probably going to go within the top 12 picks or so. It's going to leave Porter as probably most teams' number 1 guy on the board, and then you're going to have a ton of those teams that love to play man coverage, love to get physical at the line of scrimmage. Porter, as we talked about, he's the best man coverage, press coverage guy in this class. I thought he had good ball skills and made a lot of really good plays, even on slants and stuff like that, which we didn't see it from a ton of guys in this class. But I guess because he's so good in press, kind of funneled guys inside, and then he makes a play on the ball. Of course, that came with some flags as well, because he does get too handsy. But man, just his ability to play around guys' frames, just getting in their hip pockets and using that 34-inch wingspan, not only on the line of scrimmage to jam guys like you talked about, Andrew, but legitimately in the ball skills department as well. Even when he's not in the ideal spot, he kind of gets there as the ball is traveling through the air. But again, the reason I have him at 3 is just what he doesn't do and what the other 2 guys do. I think that sounded weird, but Joey Porter, just athletically, I think Witherspoon and Gonzalez are a step ahead of him. I think if you're going to play an off-man coverage type of defense, or you're going to run a little bit more zone coverage, I think Porter's a step behind Witherspoon and Gonzalez in those departments as well. So Porter's still a great player, but I think there's a slight tier break between him and my top 2 guys, which are Witherspoon and Gonzalez. Order to be determined. You'll have to find out in a minute.
Yeah, and those same reasons are why I have Porter in my top 2. We'll see where if he ends up 2 or 1 though.
Where does he end up?
And yeah, so number 2, drum roll. It's Devin Witherspoon. So Porter is my number 1 guy. And
you are
I'll get into that one. Yeah,
guy. Wow,
it's controversial, and I talked about it. I was not a fan last year. I have every reason to not like Joey Porter. His dad, Bengals arch rival. Yeah. Joey Porter specifically, and then Penn State guy. I'm an Ohio State fan, but yeah, we'll talk about
bias at all. This is no bias at all.
Yeah. Witherspoon, we've talked a lot about him. He was the best corner in the country this year. I don't think it was really close. His tape was incredible. You talked about it. If he moves to the slot, he could be a top 3 slot corner almost right away. I mean, really physical in the run game. We didn't talk about him for best run defenders, and I think that might be because he misses a few more tackles than some of the other. Well, Brian Branch was the competition. Brian Branch doesn't miss tackles. Devin Witherspoon, really aggressive there. Man coverage, just physical corner. Now, a little bit smaller. The athletic traits aren't the elite of the elite, but they're more than good enough. 5'11". I'm not concerned about him holding up on the outside. And it's just that tape. He was so refined this year, and he is an upperclassman. So with a cornerback, that's something you need. And he checked all the boxes, like you said, checks every single box that you look for in a corner.
Yeah. Witherspoon and Gonzalez. Again, I even went out, and this is where we differ, Andrew. You have Joey Porter at 1. I think Porter's number 3, still very much a first-round guy, but I'd honestly put Witherspoon and Gonzalez in a tier ahead of him and kind of just leave Porter on his own island at number 3. Look, I think between Witherspoon and Gonzalez, they're both phenomenal. Both top 15 guys in this class. I haven't finalized my big board yet, but they'll both be in the top 15. They're incredible, incredible players. We've already broke down their game, so I'm not going to go waste too much more time here. But what separates my number 1, Devon Witherspoon, there's your reveal, from Christian Gonzalez at number 2. I thought Witherspoon's film was a bit better in 2022 compared to Gonzalez. And on top of that, I just think he's a little more versatile than Christian Gonzalez is. And it's funny because they're 2 of the most versatile guys in the class, and they have some of the best tape in the class. It's kind of splitting hairs. But Witherspoon, to me, even if he doesn't work on the outside, which I find extremely hard to believe, like Witherspoon could be an all-pro in the slot or on the outside. I don't know if that's the case with the Gonzalez. So again, it's kind of splitting hairs. You could also sit here with Gonzalez, and I think this is why he's going to go first off the board, by the way, over Devon Witherspoon. It's going to be, well, they're both fantastic, but one of them has the surefire frame, the other doesn't. I think there's a stigma around nickel corners in today's NFL. It's like, I'm not going to take a nickel corner in the first round. And I sit up here and I say, well, if you have a really good nickel corner, that is massive for your defense. I think nickel corners are extremely important. Those guys out of the slot that can both run support and, drop back into zone, jam some of the best slot receivers in the NFL. That's massive. And I think Witherspoon could absolutely thrive in that role. But I do believe if you're looking at the top of this class, most teams are going to look at it as, I'm drafting one of these guys to be an outside corner. Both Witherspoon and Gonzalez are fantastic on tape, but Gonzalez has the 20, 25 extra pounds, a little extra length. He's also taller. So ultimately the frame is going to be what separates him as an outside quarterback prospect in terms of his trajectory in the NFL and projecting him in the NFL in comparison to Witherspoon. But me personally, I'd give Witherspoon a slight edge up on Christian Gonzalez, although both are phenomenal.
Yeah, and with all the great receivers like Cooper Kupp that play in the slot right now, it's not too big of a concern for me. It's why I have Witherspoon slightly ahead of Gonzalez. It's just Witherspoon can travel with any receiver, whereas Gonzalez, you're going to want to keep him on the boundaries. Witherspoon, you can move him inside. You're not gonna worry about it at all. But now Joey Porter. So why I have him number 1?
Yeah, obviously, I want to hear.
Length. He's a pterodactyl. He's got ridiculous arm length. And that was obvious last year, even when I wasn't a fan of him, because he just was so grabby. He wasn't refined. His technique was not good. I was like, this guy is not fast enough to make up for the idiotic coverage he had at times. And then totally different player on tape this year. And you mentioned a little bit earlier with slants inside. This bugs me so much when I watch Kelly Ringo is he cannot, for a guy supposedly as athletic as he is, he cannot flip his hips, turn inside and cover guys. Joey Porter, he can just swat his arms and block and he can deflect any pass, whether it's across the middle or down the field. So Joey Porter, he uses his length just in a way that no other cornerback in this class is even capable of. And then zone coverage, that's going to be the concern. You're drafting him probably to play press man, but I think because of his length and his traits, he could develop into a great zone corner if you need to, as because he's getting more comfortable in space. But it's just the traits for me. Joey Porter, the way he uses his length against receivers, and I think if he can stop being a little less grabby, which he got better at, limit the penalties a little bit, it'll be great. And the ball production, only You know, the interceptions weren't there like they were for somebody like Gonzalez, but so many pass deflections. So I just love what Porter brings to the table. I had him really high on my big board. I had him at number 3 before. I didn't have any quarterbacks in there.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to update that. It's been a while. He won't be top 3 or top 5 on my board, but he will be my top corner, pretty close with Witherspoon and Gonzalez.
Yeah, and Andrew, before we move on to the safeties, we've still got a little bit of work to do with this class. I have one question before we talk about honorable mentions and sleepers at this position. How many of these guys do you view as first-round prospects? I'm curious. I've said I view 3 of them as such, although I do believe Banks will go in the first round, potentially even a 5th. But me personally, I'd feel comfortable probably with 3 of these guys. But I don't know. Maybe you feel different?
I have 4. I think it just comes down to I'm a little bit higher on Banks. I see those athletic traits, and I'm willing to bet on them in the first round. But yeah, top 3 are obviously the clear ones. They're a tier above everybody else.
All right, so now let's get into honorable mentions. And there is one guy that if neither of us mention, I still feel convicted to talk about him because he's one of the bigger enigmas in this class. You did just say his name a couple minutes ago. It's Kelee Ringo. But maybe if one of us views him as an honorable mention, we can talk about him there. But regardless, I just wanted to throw that out there for those interested in hearing some Ringo talk. We will definitely touch up on him because he's just such a fascinating case. But Andrew, give me an honorable mention or 2. Give me a sleeper or 2. Who you like?
Yeah, I've got 2. So Ringo was the guy I had at 6th on my list. Okay. He's one of these players where I wasn't crazy high on him towards the beginning of the process, where he was top 2 on most people's board because of the traits. I think that anyone that still had him there, it'll slow down after the combine. Wasn't as impressive as you'd like. But if he ends up in one of these like Seattle cover 3 defenses, I still think he could be one of the top corners in the league. It's just for somebody who relied on traits as much as he did, I didn't see his hips really bothered me, but I do like him in that scheme. So I don't think all hope is lost for Kelee Ringo. And then some people have talked about moving him to safety. I wouldn't hate it. I think it might be somewhat of a waste of talent almost, but like safety, he could still be very impactful. But then my honorable mention that I want to talk about is Starling Thomas. This is a day 3 sleeper guy from, I believe it's UAB. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really, really fast. He just had his pro day yesterday, ran like a 4.28. And I believe it. Fastest corner in the draft.
Yeah. DJ Turner's close, but did DJ Turner run a 4?
They gave him 4.26.
4.26. So I think, but it's close, right? Their 4.2 is insane. Right.
So he was not invited to the combine, which I found kind of interesting. Was really good at the Shrine Bowl. Had some good reps against Zay Flowers. That's what's kind of popped me because Zay Flowers is one of my favorite receivers. And I'm like, oh, this guy's going toe to toe with him. That stood out. He's a big corner, over 6 foot, about 200 pounds in that speed. I think he's somebody that if you can develop those traits on the outside, he could be a high level player.
Okay, I think Ringo. We got to talk about Ringo. I know you just touch up on him. He's definitely in the running for number 5. You could put him above Emmanuel Forbes. I don't really have a problem with that. Ringo played for Georgia. I like his motor. The only issue is really, there's a couple issues, but 2022 wasn't really the leap I was hoping for Ringo. And if he took that leap, this would be a first-round prospect. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But you talked about it, Andrew. Stiff. Gets beat really outside. Where is his role in the NFL? I don't know. And the cover 3 stuff would be great if there was a team that just always ran cover 3. That's not really the case anymore. See, no team has really done it since the mid-2010s when Seattle was doing that. They thrived with it for a couple years. And then that just kind of goes away. You can't really just stick into that one coverage all game. So Ringo is interesting. The other case, though, Andrew, is it's like, okay, if we're putting him at safety, are we putting him in the box? Because I feel like free safety, although there's still coverage skills there's still some ball skills, there's still some things you like, but does he have the range to play free safety? So how do you like him in the box? Like, I'm just throwing all these different roles out there because Ringo could play 1,000 different positions. I don't know if he's going to be great at any one of them. He could be awesome. The scale, the trajectories, I'm hyping this up. The reason I'm getting so hyper is because they're to really put an emphasis on just how many different roles he could play in the NFL.
Yeah, like safety, it's such a projection there. And so I think your best bet, stick him on the outside, hope to develop those traits. It's not that he had bad tape. I think it kind of gets just because we expected him to take that leap. And then also bitter taste in your mouth after the Ohio State game, but he was going against Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, that's the best receiver in the country. So can't fault.
No, and of course, I can't find an exact measurement on his wingspan, but he's 6'2", 205. I mean, that's pretty much the ideal frame. There are a lot of athletic, traits that you do like, although the change of direction, the hips are something that we don't like. That he's a very good athlete. Again, I just think he gets beat out of press a few too many times. The tight hips are a concern, but he's got pretty good instincts, pretty good motor. He's got a lot of the traits that you want from a corner. So Ringo in the second round, don't really have a problem with it. I think there's a lot of peripherals to really like in his profile. The big concern is just, where does he play in the NFL? I can't confidently say he's going to be great in any one role. But at the same time, if he does pan out and he goes into the right scheme and he's coached up correctly, you could have legitimate options with Ringo where it's like, yeah, on this drive with this matchup, when this team's in this personnel, we're going to slide him into the box. But then, hey, we got a bigger outside corner or bigger outside receiver to deal with. Let's just throw him on the outside. It's a wide range of trajectories and different outcomes for Kelee Ringo. That's why I want to touch up on him. A couple guys for me. You talked about Garrett Williams. I think he's a mix of an honorable mention and a sleeper for me. I feel like he would be an honorable mention for sure if he didn't tear his ACL in October, because in that case, he's a second round pick, maybe an early third round pick. He's pushing for a top 5 spot on my list. But because of the ACL tear, he might go on day 3. And in that case, he kind of makes it a sleeper for me. He's not necessarily an elite athlete. I can't imagine he will be, especially off of that ACL tear, which is definitely concerning. But there are some man coverage chops and technique to like, although he didn't run it a ton at Syracuse. I think the man coverage stuff is like, if it's there, that's a good added bonus. But at the very least, you're getting an awesome zone corner, great and off man, as we talked about. He reads the quarterback's eyes well, really instinctual, good communicator. He clicks and closes downhill really well, really solid in run support. So I think all these zone heavy teams are going to love Williams. And if he's there in day 3, I think that's an awesome pick. Jalen Jones is another one that he's got the size. He's a very good athlete at his size. I haven't seen much top 10 chatter for him. I don't know if I'd put him that high necessarily, but he's probably in the running for me, honestly. If he's another one of those that's available in day 3 as an off-man zone type of guy, with that frame and those athletic skills and the instincts that he has, very instinctual football player, that's another one that for a lot of these zone teams is going to make sense. And the zone teams, I think, are going to have some fun at late day 2, early day 3, because the round 1 guys can definitely play zone, but their calling card is man. So if you're a zone heavy team that misses out on those top guys, the depth is really, really where you get a lot of these zone corners. And that's the case most years, but those are 2 sleepers for me. I know Keitrell Clark is really starting to boom up there. He's a good athlete that could play the slot pretty well. Clark Phillips is too. We have to talk, just quickly touch up on him. I know we got to get to the safeties, but you talked about it, Andrew. He might be the best zone coverage corner in this class. I don't have a problem with that. He's such a heads-up football player, great processor out of the slot. He's really can go stride for stride with anybody. Just the concern is not even concern, but the question with Clark Phillips is, how high are you going to take a slot-only corner? A guy that's small, he cannot play on the outside. He's not really going to offer any run support either, which typically from my slot corners, I want guys that can run support as well. So I don't know if Clark Phillips is going to be one of the best nickels in the league just because he doesn't offer that run support. But damn it, if you want some zone coverage, you want some just overall coverage ability, Clark Phillips is awesome.
Yeah, he's a gamer, and that's my concern with him as like a slot only. I'm a little bit worried maybe he never really gets a chance in the league because he's so small and he's not a great run defender, but he's too good in coverage to not take a chance on.
Right.
And that's why I'm holding out some hope that maybe one of these teams gets creative and finds a way to play him outside. But yeah, because he is so impressive on tape, but the physical limitations hurt. And there's another guy, which I don't really want to talk too much about, but Travius Tomlinson, yeah,
yep,
THT, similar guy, really good ball player. I like Clark Phillips a little bit more, but just so small. So the 2 fun guys.
Yeah, I mean, I look at Hodges Tomlinson. He, unlike Phillips, sorry, I'll get rid of the echo. I don't know why that's popped up. Apologies for that quick echo. But Hodges Tomlinson, he played a little bit on the outside for TCU, quite a bit, definitely more than Phillips. smooth as butter. He's got the vertical speed. Yeah, he's another fun one. I like that. I like that shout as well, especially, again, if you're just looking for that off-man coverage. Travius Hodges Tomlinson, that's a perfect fit for him. But let's talk safeties now, because I think we've gone pretty in-depth on this corner class. And as the show goes on throughout the weeks, we're going to talk more about these corners as we kind of mock it up a little or talk team fits. As maybe we get more guests on the show, because we're going to have different people coming onto the show, and we're going to talk all these different topics. But we've gone in pretty in-depth on the corners so far. Let's talk safeties now and rank some of these guys. Starting with number 5, Andrew, who you got?
And number 5 for me, you mentioned him a little bit earlier, Jordan Battle from Alabama. He's an Alabama defensive back. I think that kind of sums it up. He's good at most things. I don't think he has an elite trait. He's not an elite athlete. I was expecting more of a jump. Like I think he should have maybe declared last year. I don't think he improved his draft stock really that much at all. And part of that's just because Brian Branch was so impressive on the same defense. But Jordan Battle's one of these guys where you get him, he's going to be solid in coverage. He's not going to miss a ton of tackles. He's a smart player. Just to do it all safety, and which in today's NFL, that's just what you need.
Yeah. So at number 5 for me, I had Christopher Smith, but just Chris Smith out of Georgia. A little less versatile than some of the guys that I have right behind him. And I mean right behind him. But I love the fact, first of all, that Chris Smith has over 1,000 snaps under his belt for that Georgia Bulldogs defense. So that's a top school SEC competition, tons of reps. And I think as a free safety, he's going to be really, really good in the league. Talk about the range that he has. Like, this dude can fly in the back end, fly. He's got some pretty damn good ball skills as well. And just instinctually, one of the smarter safeties, I think, in this class. And a lot of that goes into playing all the reps for Georgia. Like, that obviously helps. He is small. I think he's 190 pounds, 188 pounds, 5'11". I'm ballparking his measurables. I didn't write them down right in front of me. One of the guys that I missed the measurables on.
Yeah, you're right there. 5'10 and a half, or 5'10, 5'8", and 192. I'm looking at his RAS.
Beautiful. So that's
you're right on.
Yeah, right on. All right, perfect. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that, because I was like, I hate ballparking the measurables, but I swear I checked like 2 days ago, and that's where it was at. But no, I think even in the run game, you're not really going to expect a ton from Smith, but he's going to be playing free safety anyway. And at the very least, he's a good click and close guy. Like, he can fly downhill. And I think he wraps up, not even wraps up, but he just targets the legs so well. That's what you want from those smaller guys. He plays with that tenacity in the run game to fire downhill, target low, and he can make some impressive tackles here and there. So Chris Smith's my number 5. But who's your number 4, Andrew? I think I know who it is. It's a guy that I'm lower on.
Just to talk a little bit about Chris Smith, I'm actually not a fan of his, really, in this class. He tested like not well at all, which was kind of surprising. Good 10-yard split, but his 40 time was slower than expected. Obviously, a smaller guy. I agree, he's a really smart player, leader on that Georgia defense. So I think he's gonna have a role in the NFL. But I don't know that he's physically going to be able to hold up in single high coverage.
His ceiling is lower than. Probably, like, if I were to rank the 6 through 10, I would say over 50% of those guys have a higher ceiling than Smith. I won't lie, I played it a little safe at the safety position this year.
That's all right. Yeah. My number 4, Sidney Brown, who I think you mentioned earlier in one of them. He's a guy that I mentioned as I wrote a sleepers article for TWSN. He was one of the guys I had on there after the Senior Bowl, just because I was like, wow, this is a guy that played a lot in the box at Illinois, but was really, really impressive in the one-on-one coverage drills. He looked like a cornerback almost out there. I think he can play anywhere in the secondary. Obviously a great athlete like his brother Chase. Coming from a really good defense, like they've produced Nate Hobbs, obviously Devon Witherspoon. So I have a lot of trust in Illinois' coaching staff. And so the athletic traits impressed me. The coverage, zone coverage was obviously a strength of his. Now tackling, I thought he's not one of the better run defenders or tacklers in the class, which is a concern. And if you don't have him in your top 5 because of that, completely understand. But just from a matchup coverage situation, I was really impressed with his.
So Sidney Brown was my number 6. I left him off. I said earlier I was like a little lower on him. You could easily make the case for him to be higher than Chris Smith. I had a Chris Smith, Sidney Brown debate in the car in my head earlier. It maybe like started talking to myself a little bit about it, because I was like, Brown is so weird. he's fun. He's great. He flies around the field. Awesome athlete. You talked about the coverage, Andrew. One of the best coverage safeties in this class. The man-to-man stuff, I thought at the Senior Bowl, he might have been the best safety there. The coverage was awesome. I trust him to line up even against tight ends if he needs to. He went step for step with Luke Musgrave on occasion. So, like, that stuff is fun. I feel like you could also slide him to the back end because he has all the speed. He has the range. And he's so good in zone coverage. And for the limited reps that he got in the back end, playing free safety, playing single high, he was great. But what's so weird to me, Andrew, and why maybe I'm duking myself out of Sidney Brown a little bit, it's like, well, 5 years at Illinois, but the biggest thing is, why is he playing in the box so much? Like, not that Brown is afraid of physicality, because he certainly isn't. Again, he flies around the field. But he misses so many tackles, and he's so great in coverage. So I didn't understand that. Andrew, am I like overthinking this a little bit? Because that just didn't make a lot of sense to me.
And I think some of it might have just be the embarrassment of riches that defense has had. Kirby Joseph
I agree.
was incredible in the back end last year. I was a fan of his. And so that might have been, hey, we're going to delegate Sidney Brown to it and just keep him where he's comfortable. And then they had my guy, Jartavius Martin, this year. Yeah, but it is a little bit strange because I think it fits his skill set a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't. And again, not that he's bad in run support. And this is the Chris Smith debate. I think Brown has a higher ceiling than Chris Smith because he's bigger. I think he's a better athlete. And in terms of run support, both have their issues. I think Chris Smith could take better angles. Sidney Brown misses too many tackles, but Brown probably has higher upside there, Andrew. He has way more experience in the box. He's bigger than Chris Smith. So that was my debate between Chris Smith and Sidney Brown. I think one has the higher floor, one has the higher ceiling. I diverted to the guy with the higher floor, which I kind of did with my number 4 as well, in Jordan Battle, who you had at number 5. Not really great at anything. He definitely would be a bit lower, if anything, rather than higher. But I do like Battle a lot. Like, he started as a freshman for this defense. A Nick Saban Alabama defense. He started as a freshman, and he's been rock solid throughout. Again, another one of these guys with explosive click and close stuff. I do think as a tackler, he needs to target lower. He got ejected from at least
definitely.
one game.
That could be.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, Andrew. Like, taking helmets off, helmet to helmet hits. It's like,
you don't expect that from a 4-year starter with Nick Saban. You would have thought that would have gotten cleaned up right away.
Yeah, and I will say it got better, but it didn't get cleaned up entirely, which is one thing that I do want to see. But because Battle has the size and he's so good in click and close, and he's, pretty technically sound as a tackler, when he does go low, I'm like holding out hope that he'll be a pretty good run stopper. On the back end, really doesn't have elite range, but he's good. He's a jack of all trades safety. And when you factor in that he was just this ultra experienced starter from Alabama, it's hard for me to see Jordan Battle failing in the NFL. And maybe, just maybe, we're underselling his athletic tools just a slight bit, maybe. Just holding out a little bit of hope for his ceiling, because Battle could be a well above average starter. And I think at number 4, that's not a bad thing at all.
Yeah, it might just be some prospect fatigue, honestly. I think you watched Alabama, they have so many exciting players on their defense. You've been watching Battle for so many years, and just he's good. He's not great.
Right.
We've said everything there is to say about Battle.
Yeah,
and number 3, my number 3, opposite of Battle when it comes to good, not great at everything, really exciting player, J.L. Skinner from Boise State.
Wow,
this was my guy in the summer. And so he didn't take a huge step this year, which I think is fine, because I've seen enough flashes to feel pretty confident about J.L. Skinner. But he's got a huge frame, 6'4", well over 200 pounds, the biggest safety in this class, except maybe another guy we'll talk about pretty soon. Decent in coverage, he's rangy enough. Because of his size, he's physical in man coverage. He can go toe-to-toe with guys, but you're not drafting J.L. Skinner for his coverage. You're drafting him for the elite plays he makes in run defense. I mean, there's some plays where he looks like Cam Chancellor with his size going downhill. He's a big hitter, and you see that sometimes in coverage, flying to get an interception, flying to create a pass breakup. Just a really exciting watch. Safeties are kind of hard to scout if you don't have all 22, so if you're watching a safety just to have fun, J.L. Skinner's the guy I recommend. Really fun tape. Now, he's had some injuries. The athleticism, he's great. He's a great athlete. Is he elite of the elite, which is something you kind of want from a guy when you're saying, he might be the next Cam Chancellor. I don't know, but just so many flashes. Such a fun player, J.L. Skinner.
So my thing with Skinner was he's a box safety, like the definition of
Yeah.
it, Andrew. I think you put that up to a T. In coverage, he had a couple flashes, a couple fun plays on the ball, but for the most part, really isn't wowing me in that department. I don't think for all the athletic tools he has going downhill, I think backpedaling is a bit of a different story, and
Yeah.
really the coverage stuff. So with that being said, for these guys that aren't great in coverage, don't really offer a lot of coverage value, but they're a safety and they're a very hard hitter, really good in at run stopping. It's like, well, is that just a linebacker? And in JL Skinner's case, is he big enough to consistently play in the box 24/7? I think he'll be okay, but I don't know. I think for a guy that lacks all those coverage drops, typically for a box safety, the appeal with that is um yes, he does, pretty much all the things that you want in terms of run fits and hard hitting, but they also offer a little bit of that sideline to sideline range and some coverage versatility as well. If you want them to match up on a slot out of a different look or a tight end or potentially drop back into a too high shell. I don't think Skinner does a lot of those things all that great. That was my issue with him.
And that's fair. He's another one of these guys where he's got flaws, but I'm betting on the high end traits he has as a box safety.
Yep. It's you got to put him in there. Like that's if you're drafting Skinner,
don't put him
that day 2 commitment.
Yeah, he's a guy you got to have a plan to use him. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be in the box. We talked about that, and I think for Skinner to cash in on that day 2 draft capital that he's probably going to be, he's got to show me more. Hopefully a little more coverage. Maybe a bit more sideline to sideline. Not that that's terrible, but we'll see with Skinner. That was definitely one that we varied on. But my number 3 was Jamie. Whoa, this is interesting. The top 3 I feel like is not consensus. I would not say consensus, but it's pretty popular. And I won't lie, I have the pretty popular top 3. But you left one of those 3 off.
Yeah, Jamie Robinson. He was right on the outside with Jordan Battle. Okay. So it's not that I don't like Jamie Robinson, but I don't see him as one of these high end safety prospects. But I'll let you do most of the talking on Robinson.
And I talked about it earlier. With the versatility argument, Jamie Robinson, man, he played a lot of roles for that Florida State defense. I've heard the argument, the debate, is he a round 3 guy? Is he a round 2 guy? I kind of want to push him up into the late round 2 kind of grade. Ooh. If I had to grade Jamie Robinson. I mean, just it's the versatility for me. It's the versatility we see every year. I think a lot of these safety prospects that are kind of like a linebacker, but they also bring the coverage stuff. And with Robinson, I don't think his versatility, he's elite in enough areas for me to say first round guy or even an early second round guy. But man, if you have a creative defensive coordinator, you're a team that likes to get light. Let's get to our dime packages. Let's have some versatile chess pieces on this defense. Jamie Robinson, especially if he falls to the 3rd round, that's a name I'm very, very interested in because the dude can play in the box. He has some coverage reps. Again, is he elite in a ton of areas, enough for me to rank him in the top 40 or anything like that? I can't say so, but in the right scheme where you're moving him around, matchup to matchup on that per basis, I love Jamie Robinson. And I think because the league is so versatile nowadays and they put such a heavy emphasis on versatility, I got to give Robinson some love.
Yeah, and jack of all trades, to me, kind of a master of none.
That's
not the best athlete, but round 3, I'm fine with it. He's one of these guys that I like more as a player than a prospect, if that makes any sense. Yeah, I loved watching him at Florida State. Yeah. I'm not sure he's going to be some high level safety, but yeah, good, fun player. But
you know what I want to say about Robinson? The floor is actually like sneakily a little low.
Yeah,
it is because you said it, Andrew. Like he's not an elite athlete. And he's not really elite in all that many areas. So it's like he could easily just be, he's a little below average everywhere in the NFL. And that does concern me. Don't get me wrong. But I think in the right scheme, there's still a versatile role for him. But he is a little scheme specific for sure.
And it's not even that he's not an elite athlete. He's not really a good athlete either.
Right.
It's kind of a low testing numbers, but that's all right. Number 2, another one of these versatile guys, Antonio Johnson for me, from Texas A&M. He kind of went into this year with like top 15 hype, which is a little crazy.
Behind it. Yeah.
there's not a ton of safeties where I feel that strongly about him. And Antonio Johnson definitely was not one of those players, but 6'3", 200 pounds, and he's almost a slot corner. That's where he did his best work at Texas A&M, but really good matching up against slot receivers. And that's something where I can see an easy transition to the NFL. He's one of these guys where he goes again. He's going to be a tight end eraser, which is what I like about him. And then you can move him out. He's rangy enough. You can play him at free safety. You can put him in the box because of that size. He showed a lot. He showed kind of everything I look for in a safety. He checks the boxes, although I'm not sure that he's a first-round elite safety.
That's so Antonio Johnson got a lot of that first-round buzz, like you talked about, Andrew. And I was sitting there like, I can't get behind that. So I wonder if he's going to end up at like number 3 for me. One of these safeties will rise and overtake his spot. I think Johnson does get a bit overrated by some, but ultimately it was really hard for me to find a third. Even Jamie Robinson, who, again, if he was going to be anywhere besides 3, would definitely be lower. I don't really think he can challenge Antonio Johnson. Compare Johnson and Robinson. They're both versatile players, except Johnson is legitimately elite in some areas, and that includes athleticism. He's a former receiver, and now we're kind of looking at him, obviously, on the defensive side of the ball. The ball skills aren't great, but you do wonder, as he's still semi-newer to the position, will that kind of develop as time goes on? I'm holding out hope for that. But he's great out of the slot. You talked about it, Andrew, tight end eraser, but he also plays with awesome instincts and physicality. So it's really just a whole package in a guy that could move around to multiple different positions. Like, this is Jamie Robinson on steroids type of stuff. They play different roles, obviously. And I talked about how maybe I am a little concerned about Robinson. You are right. His maybe I did put him a little too high, but Johnson is somebody, I think he has the number 2 spot kind of I don't want to say locked up, but it's tough for me to really make an argument for any one of these guys over Antonio Johnson at this point. I like him as an early to mid second round guy.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about that. And again, you said it, former receiver, just an interesting frame at safety, which is always nice to see.
Yep. Number 1.
And then we've got the same number 1. It's Brian Branch.
Yeah.
It's Brian.
Okay. Yeah.
I think the number 1 trait is that tackling. Unbelievable tackler. Aidan, you talked about it. It was a great point. It's not that he's some rangy free safety that comes downhill when he wants to and doesn't miss tackles. No, he is playing in the box. He's playing in the slot. He's around the run game all the time, and he's still flawless. So that's impressive. And then in coverage, really sound. I mean, he's an Alabama defensive back. He's not making the mistakes that some of the guys on this list will make. He's not an elite athlete, but he's more than capable to run with guys. So whether he's a slot cornerback at the next level, whether he's a free safety, strong safety, he's one of these guys that he fits with what the modern defenses like to do. Like when I think about the Bills, Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, I can easily see Brian Branch being one of those guys in a couple of years.
Yeah, he's insane. There isn't really much not to like. I talked about how he's not elite on the back end, but he's still fine there. Man coverage, he's carried some slots and some tight ends before. Again, not really elite there, a bit undersized as well, but one of the best tackling defensive backs I have ever seen. Again, can play that slot position, whether that's out of run support or carrying some of these slot receivers. The instincts are top-notch. The communication's top-notch. I talked about that earlier with his tackling, just the way he can pass things off. Awesome in zone coverage. Pretty much the whole 9 yards. Brian Branch is a first-round guy. I know the safety position isn't a premium position, but when you get a high-end guy like this in Brian Branch, he's worth the first-round pick. He is. He's absolutely worth the first-round pick. He's insane. This was an unquestioned number 1. But Andrew, now that we got past the obvious there with Brian Branch at number 1, dive in. Give me a sleeper or 2 or an honorable mention or 2 that you want to mention at the safety position.
Yeah, we've talked about my 2 honorable mentions. My 6 and 7 were Jamie Robinson and then Jartavius Martin, who was kind of a tier below those guys. I got to talk about him with the versatile guys. So kind of a deeper cut here. Kayvon Merriweather from Iowa just kind of popped when I was watching Lucas Van Ness and Jack Campbell, who I'm a big fan of. He comes from an Iowa defense where I just trust those guys to play at a high level in the NFL. He's not some elite athlete, but he was really sound in coverage. He was one of the best coverage safeties in college football last year, and so I just think his coverage ability is going to translate.
I wonder too, out of all these safeties, because we kind of talked about the top guys, does a guy like Jartavius Martin, for example, because he's going to be one of my sleepers too, Does he any chance he sneaks into the third round? You have to imagine too.
I
Like a
think
lot of
so.
these teams have the Sidney Brown, Devon Witherspoon tape running on repeat. You see Martin in the background making a lot of plays. Like, does he maybe sneak into the third round?
Yeah, and Jordan Reed is a big fan of his, and he's a little more tuned in than we are over at ESPN. He's a former scout guy, so he seems to think that teams love Jartavius Martin. So yeah, with these safeties, that like compensatory third round pick range, top 100, I think is definitely a possibility for him.
Yeah, and I'm looking at like the mock draft database. I see a lot of fourth round for him, but he's got the size. Pretty versatile. Like you talked about Martin earlier. He was in the running for my fifth spot at the very least. Like you had him close to Jamie Robinson. I had Robinson at 3 again. Him and Forbes are two guys that I kind of like talked myself a little bit out of as the show went on. It's just the size and the athletic stuff. Especially for Forbes, it was like, 166, like give him a year. But no, when you really say it out loud, it's like 166 pounds. It's crazy. But regardless, I think Jartavius Martin we could get 3 Fighting Illini playing in the NFL in a year or two, or 2-3 years. We're going to look back and be like, man, they gave us 3 very good NFL players. Legitimately, it could be just like that. And this is going to be an awesome class for Illinois.
Yeah, their defense was so fun to watch. And they've even been putting out NFL guys like obviously Kirby Joseph was great for the Lions this year. And then somebody
last year. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Owen Carney was their edge guy. I don't think he's on a roster right now, but I liked him as a prospect. And then they've got a guy, I'm blanking on his name.
Owen Papoa, on linebacker, we're going to talk about him next week.
Yeah. Or Papoa, did you say?
Yeah, the linebacker. Oh, he plays for Auburn. Never mind.
Yeah, he's gonna say he's Auburn. No, but they've got an
Auburn,
edge
Illinois,
prospect.
same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. They've got an edge prospect either coming out next year or 2 years from now. He might have been a redshirt freshman that he's pretty exciting. I can't remember his name, but yeah, so they're slowly becoming a nice little defensive output.
Yeah, I was trying to plug next week's show with the linebackers. Papoa plays for Auburn. So forget that. But regardless, Illinois secondary class is awesome. We're going to talk about Chase Brown down the line when we dive into the running back. So that should be fun. But yeah, Andrew, I think that pretty much sums up today's show. Just going a deep dive into the secondary guys. Again, make sure you hit that subscribe button because we are going to be coming out with weekly shows. Not only just talking about the draft, but just sports in general. We got a ton of NBA, NFL content, the whole 9 yards coming out throughout the week. But in specific for you draft nerds out there, I would assume, most of us love the draft. If you're listening to this, you can consider yourself a draft nerd. It's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. We're going to have shows coming out weekly, might end up coming out 2 times a week as we near the draft, but we're just going to be doing a ton of these in-depth rankings and superlatives for all these positions and starting to get into, mocking things up a little bit and talking about scheme, specific team to scheme fits and what we want some of these teams to do in the draft. So tons of great, fun draft coverage coming soon. But that's going to do for myself and Andrew. See you guys next time.